ready to party with Austin?
Yeah.
First, I want to thank everybody for registering and donating and help keeping this awesome event going, and thank my sponsor, Bay Area Reefers, for contributing to this awesome event. Austin's here to give an awesome presentation on Bulletproof Reefkeeping. A little bit about Austin. He's been involved in the aquarium industry since 2002, working at local fish stores, coral farms, fish breeding facilities. He founded his own company, Aquabox, which focused on very unique custom design builds for residential and commercial facilities, which kind of led him to his role where he's at now at Tenji Aquariums. Tenji is a design and installation company located in Carmel, California, and they service worldwide residential, large commercial tanks, and they service public aquariums like the Monterey Bay Aquarium, California Academy of Science, Georgia Aquarium. They touch it all, and he's going to give a talk on basically the fundamentals of installation and design and the maintenance to keep our tanks from catastrophic failure and keep them looking hot and make it easier on us to support these animals. And with no further ado, here's Mr. Austin Lefevre.
I don't even know what to say anymore. I mean, he kind of took my first few slides here. That was great. But for starters, I definitely want to thank Kenny and High Tide Aquatics for setting this up. Let's give them a quick round of applause. This is really, really cool. This is my friend Matt. I heard some of you guys met him. We've been in the industry a long time, and like we grew up going to conferences and understanding that there's a lot of learning involved, and we can all figure out how to do this together. And over the years, we've seen like marketing take it over, and all of these big businesses come in, and it's like some of it's super cool, but unfortunately some of the shows have kind of gone away. You get in your butts out and into a place like this, you're the 0.1% of the hobby of the industry. So I think you all deserve a round of applause for wanting to learn something more and keep these animals long term. Like it's super, super cool. Super cool. Yeah, I'm just a big fish nerd. I've been doing it, I thought, 20 years until we did the math the other day. I've been doing it 21 years now. So this was going to be my 20th year anniversary. That was last year. We did not celebrate it. And I just want to preface with a couple things. Number one, if you have like things that work for you, keep doing them. There's a million ways to skin a cat. You might be able to pick up a couple things here that help you, hopefully a lot, maybe nothing, and maybe you'll leave like, this guy's an idiot, I don't know what he's talking about. But that just goes to paint the picture that everyone can be successful doing wildly different things. Kenny and I even discussed a couple things on his tanks he's doing, and I'm seeing great results. I'm like, maybe we should consider that more. So it's all about learning and improving, but coming from a business aspect, I really force myself to come up with kind of a recipe, if you will, that I could teach my one brother, I'm 21 years older than, or someone in German that can barely speak English, or Germany, or whatever it is. It's all kind of the same. It's like mathematics is the same across the world, right? So I tried to develop a little recipe and way of doing things that I could talk to anyone about, and this works. So this talk I developed, I think, 2017, 2016, and kind of done it a few different places, and as I refreshed it for today, I was amazed at how much is the same. So like new generations of equipment, I had to put in new photos, but the premise is the same, and I think it just goes to show that this really works. I don't think I'm going to blow anyone's mind here, but again, it's just a really cool way to do things that, in my opinion, help us have more fun with the tanks. Quick disclaimer. Me or Tenji, we're not responsible for any damages, loss of life. You know, follow good common sense. The views expressed here are my own and do not necessarily represent Tenji. They might get mad at a couple of things. So three main topics we're going to talk about is the planning stages, then how we're choosing our equipment, and then the maintenance protocol. Those three things together will make you a successful aquarist over time, and you can have an aquarium where you're pulling out coral before you know what to do. But if you don't know me, well, Kenny just got all these slides out of the way here for us, but I've been infatuated with aquatic life for as long as I can remember. I'm an avid scuba diver, I play in kelp, and we found ourselves doing a lot more free diving lately. It's a little bit easier than scuba. And then typically when I'm scuba diving now, I'm inside an aquarium. So when someone's like, do you want to go scuba dive for fun? I'm like, I just did that, you know, in a big tank to fix a bulkhead or something. It's not fun diving, don't get me wrong. I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My wife is also from Michigan. We moved out here about 6 years ago, and I did run a couple different businesses there, one of which was a nationwide aquarium design and installation company. We started working with some public aquariums. I knew of Tenji. We met at a couple conferences. We really fell in love and kind of like started working with one another. They absorbed me, and I moved out here. We have two boys that love long walks on the beach And we do actually recently have a new little aquarium that you'll see at the end. Not even Matt knew about that until today. Tenji was founded in 2001 by 3 former employees of Monterey Bay Aquarium. They were all curators in their different departments, and over time said, hey, we really like the design and build aspect. They worked with Monterey Bay to find a good way to leave the company but still be involved somewhat. Technically right now we are completely separate, but we do occasionally work with them. A couple projects Matt and I are working on together right now. Our focus at Tenji historically has been public aquariums and science centers, but we have branched out and we do some residential and commercial stuff as well. The main focus of the business is develop systems that withstand the test of time and most of all are easy for the aquarist to maintain. It's really, really easy nowadays to overcomplicate systems, and I am not a techie person, you'll learn that. So when it's like firmware updates, blah, 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 I'm like, nope, nope, we're talking about fish tanks, not cell phones. So there's a couple different ways we'll look at technology and how it can help. We have a great design team at Tenji. One of our in-house designers actually drew this. Can you see it? Yeah, it looks okay. That's an eye wash drawing, or like watercolor drawing, that we sent down to Florida, and the facility used this for fundraising, so we can be involved before they even know what they want or have the money to do it. From that, we develop full design schematics, which the clients, architects, and designers can integrate into their plans, and then we send them off well in advance so that every other trade, like electricians, your HVAC, your commercial plumbers, and so forth, can kind of get their electric in the wall, get their pipes in before we come in, and it just makes sure that our on-site deployments go as smoothly as possible. Our design sets for these bigger projects oftentimes are like 50 to 60 pages long. They're big booklets, and each system gets broke out with system requirements. It's going to be power, it's going to be the actual pump. You guys are going to recognize some of this equipment, which is why I threw it. We still use hobby grade equipment depending on the size of the system. This project, I guess, or some of our projects, public aquarium projects generally take like 3 to 4 years to come to fruition. So the day that you would call me to the day that we're done building it is a 3 or 4 year project. We can't knock these things out much faster, typically because there's other designers involved. If there's fundraising involved, we're going to throw another year at that. There's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of Zoom calls. We were very used to what was happening in COVID for everyone else prior to that. It's kind of the way of our lives. 3/4 of that 2 to 3 year to 4 years is just planning. Once we go on site, we're generally there for about a month. 2 weeks to 6 weeks is kind of our average time to build out these big tanks. So that's really fast when you're looking at multi-thousand gallon aquariums and all the process water piping and everything that gets involved. So we're really proud of our ability to get in and out. And then in a facility like where Matt works, that allows them to bring the public in immediately after that. So all of this stuff's getting built off site, brought in, built very, very quickly. Animals might already be on site, media's loaded, systems are filled, and off we go. So it takes a long time to build these things, and that, coming from a fish nerd hobby background, I had no idea. We do some commercial stuff. So this was a big freshwater system we did at the Amazon headquarters in Seattle. We'll do small tanks all the way up to about 200,000 gallons, and freshwater, saltwater. Our work encompasses pretty much everything besides pools or hot tubs. That's a totally different industry. But we'll do like a water wall in a business or something if it works for both parties. We get into that as well. Freshwater planet habitats are becoming more and more popular, so we're doing these in more public spaces. This is, I guess we called it an expanded triangle paludarium tank. So it's not a perfect triangle, the walls are actually bow out like that. When I first saw the tank, I said, it looks like it's already failing. It was really weird to look at. But it's a totally rimless tank. There's no supports in the corner, so you can walk right up and pull on it. It's a very, very cool exhibit. And they have great aquarists on site that are taking care of it. We don't only work with fish though, we'll build it for any aquatic animal. We do a lot of birds. Penguins are still very popular in the public aquarium industry. I haven't held one yet, but I've been around a lot of them. They smell terrible. I don't know if there's any hunter fishers that have been into Cabela's around the US. We did almost all the big waterfalls. I think we did about 25 of them throughout the US. It was really good projects. It was really fun. They had a great team. Just like you guys have a great fish store owner you like working with here, Kenny, our clients can make or break if it's fun to go to the project job site. Cabela's wound up being pretty great. They did get bought out by Bass Pro Shops a couple years ago, and so the phone stopped ringing. Maybe someday they'll build some more. Then we do a lot of back of house work. This is a seahorse and jellyfish culture system. I think it's in San Francisco, isn't it? think that's at Steinhardt, yeah. I would say probably my personal job, 3/4 of what I do is actually all behind the scenes stuff. A lot of my display tanks you're not going to see. It's a huge part of our business, and I kind of like some of this better because when you get into the finishing design work on the front end, you're dealing with a lot of different types of great finish carpenters, but the work is very delicate, very detailed. I want to go build a big fish tank and swim in it, you know what I mean? And they're just like, how about this edge molding? I don't know. So we do the back house stuff just as much as the front of house stuff. This was one of my favorite front of house exhibits we did. This is the Nicardi Nature Center in New York. If I ever hit the lottery, I want a tank like this in my living room. I think it's so cool. I love playing with lights up above. You know, it's just something outside of the hobby that you don't see as much, which we do a lot with. This is another paludarium type setup. I don't know how big I am on the stuffed bear there in the middle, but they do have a really cool like education side. We get involved with designing some of this stuff as well. So when you push that button, something in the tank lights up, or one of these spotlights will light up. I don't have a lot of my role involved with that, but when I do, I get, you know, you're like a kid in a candy store because you're like, you have to think like a 5th grader. It's fantastic. Another look at some of the quarantine systems. Again, this is kind of like where my sweet spot is nowadays. And there's a lot of work that goes into quarantine systems that as a hobbyist we wouldn't think about. We can really specify what kind of fish they're going to deal with. If it's an aquaculture facility, you're working with like anchovies or something that has like really high oxygen requirements. Certain fish just have very delicate processes that can occur, and in a reef hobby, we're never going to experience that. So I've learned a lot building these systems, and then seeing what, you know, Monterey Bay is doing behind the scenes, and Steinhardt, how they're utilizing them. My background at my last business involved quarantining a lot of fishes, like Kenny's doing here for you guys. It is fishes, by the way, if it's different species. And watching what the public facilities can do with these animals that come in looking like they're just on death's doorstep is pretty impressive. But they need the right systems to do it. So we just build them in different sizes, you know, and again, it's kind of specific to the temperature requirements, obviously parameter requirements, but then how big are they? These systems are built with robust equipment, and it's everything you need and nothing you don't. So there's no bells and whistles really. There's probably alert systems on a lot of these over time, but it's just what you see is what you get, and it's all about the fish in the tank versus, you know, the decor and everything else. A couple other projects we've done that are odd ducks. This is a Bigelow Labs phytoplankton culture lab, is in Maine. We got this because it's down the street from our office in Maine, and the co-owner had a contact there. Very cool facility. Shows the amazing design work that our team can do when it comes to organizing pipes. I can't tell you what all that stuff does, but it is pretty wild what they've done. This one I was more involved in. This is a really cool, I'm a big deep water fish nerd, angelfish in particular. This is a, we call it the fish compression chamber. It's actually based off of a design from a former Monterey Bay employee. He came to us with the idea of kind of creating something that was maybe commercialable, something we could sell to other public aquariums. So we built this, took it to a raw facility. Unfortunately, we haven't sold one yet, but we've gotten a lot of interest in it. Basically, it's a giant PVC tube. It stands about 3 feet tall. You can pressurize this chamber, and you can see in the front window here. This isn't new technology. What is new is the ability to keep seawater recirculating from an external sump, keeping the system pressurized, and we even have a feed port on the side. So you can dump food in here, feed the fish while it's still pressurized. Why do you pressurize these things? Well, it's a gas bladder issue typically. A lot of these rockfish are line caught pretty deep, so they come up very fast. And I don't want to be too gruesome, but when they come up, their eyes are out and a lot of their insides are out as well. Sometimes that can kind of come back on their own. Oftentimes that's a dead fish swimming. So you can utilize a chamber like this. This fish is in this chamber. This was taken about 3 or 4 months after this. A couple quick things. This is never fun, but I think it's really important as hobbyists that are getting looked at from other sectors that we do keep morals in mind. I think it's something we should try and prioritize and discuss with our fellow aquarists and friends. There's a couple things that I always talk about with clients, before we get in bed with them. And the first thing is, can we build you a system that allows your animals to thrive, not just survive? So the aesthetics of equipment and collecting high-end coral can be fun. Our goal should be to get each and every one of our animals thriving, not just surviving. And if that's not our goal, probably don't buy that animal, or maybe find another hobby. These are not cut flowers. You know, they're not going to be easily to be replaced. Most of these animals are still coming from the ocean. Aquaculture's come a long way, but we do put a dent on it. So I think we just need to respect that. All of our animals, whether they're fish or corals, have the ability to survive much longer in our tanks than they do in the wild nowadays. This slide is 5 years old. These have not been updated. 2 of these fish are still alive. Does anybody want to take a guess? Okay. That is correct. What's the other fish that's still alive? Lemon peel. Yeah, that's Rob's fish in Colorado. This fish unfortunately perished. This is the peppermint angel on Kyoshia Endo's cover of the Angel Fishes of the World book. It was 18 when it died. And this fish, I can't get an answer on, but that fish was 23 years old. That's Kai's favorite fish. He's just a phenomenal reef builder, contributor as well. And that fish does not look like what it looks like when it's collected. That is an old, grumpy fish, you know, but the aquarist took such good care of it that it literally lived 25-ish years. That's insane. You know, like when I got into the industry, I'm thinking, oh, Austin, that fish can live 6 months, maybe this fish 1 year. You know, that's what we're told, and that's what we expect. But these animals really can live longer than cats and dogs sometimes if we do it right. And I think that we should, knowing what we know now, that should be our priority. So, and a lot of corals don't necessarily have a finite lifespan. They can keep growing and growing and growing. So the beautiful thing nowadays is we understand aquaculture. We know how to frag, heal corals, share them with others. It's an entire industry, but they can keep growing. So it's not a function of like buying something and then deciding, it doesn't match my drapes this month, let's do something new. And shout out, that's Jake Adams swimming over that massive coral. So RIP, brother, we love you, man. And finally, the animals we keep, they're ambassadors to their wild counterparts that can instill motivation for conservation for everyone of every age. That's my youngest brother right there. We are 21 years apart. He's a big fish nerd now and is just getting his driver's license, so look out. But I think what we do and what we show and how we portray and speak of our aquariums, everybody pays attention to that. Even the people we don't want to be paying attention to that. So when we continue to let outsiders say what they want and we don't have a really good industry leg on it, what we do in the hobby as hobbyists and coming to these things really helps, and we can share success stories with one another versus what a lot of the laymen get seen, unfortunately. You know, this was completely whacked out propaganda that was shot out there when they were trying to shut Hawaii down some years ago. This campaign actually failed, but 2 years later it worked, and Hawaii is currently closed. Which is super unfortunate because it's one of the, if not best well-managed fishery in the entire world. This was a quick stat that I really like. Bruce Carlson put these slides together, but 1999 the collection started, at least the recording of the collection started, and we see here in 2015 the population is actually up 31% from those fish transects? Counting the fish in the open to collectors area. And then here we have the fish replenishment areas and marine protected areas. So in the marine protected areas, the population went up roughly 29%, in that same 31% it went up over it's being collected. So what we see is the trend happens, you know, nature happens, winds happen, storm happens, and it goes up and down. A well-managed fishery is a well-managed fishery, and it should be allowed to stay open. But unfortunately, when that propaganda gets put out there, we all vote on it, right? And if we're like emotionally voting versus looking at from our logistical scientific mindset, it's easy to vote for that. And I understand why it happened. It's just unfortunate that it did. What we do, how we buy, and how we treat other reef keepers and help them along will help prevent this in the future. All right, we're done with that. Let's talk about tanks. So SPS is, what's it stand for? As far as corals, can anybody tell me? SPS. Small polyp. Stony is the layman's term. It's scleractinian is technically, but you're right, it's small polyp stony. So SPS, and a while back, long-term hobbyist Greg Carroll came up with SPS actually means stability promotes success. And it's stuck. And I took it a little bit further. I don't think it's only for SPS corals, your acropora and so forth. I think it's for everything. Stability promotes success in everything we do. And at the end of the day, we're keeping water stable. We can keep all these pretty fishes, all these pretty corals, and put all this expensive crap in it. But if it's water is what we're keeping, and then everything else comes with the water. So let's keep that water stable. And there's two major parameters that I like to consider. most people do. This is just the way I talk with clients about it. So we have coral building parameters, alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. And then we have our nutrient set, algae fuel, which I typically discuss as nitrates and phosphates and how do those play with one another. Looking at a water change and how that affects is as our tanks continue on, the coral building parameters go down because corals are utilizing them, and our nutrients rise because fish and corals are excreting waste. When we do a water change and those nutrients go back up, the coral building parameters go back up, we replenish alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, and we deplete or dilute our other nutrients. We let that go again, do another water change, back and forth we go. In a perfect world, maybe water changes would do everything. But of course we live in an imperfect world. And technically you could probably grow coral in a bucket. If you were doing 100% water changes, you had some flow device and you had good light over there, you can grow coral. You just have to be doing water changes like every single day. So a lot of the equipment that we're looking at is really just to keep these parameters stable in between our water changes. Now again, this is a water change based method, and this is what I talk with people across the world that helps them. So from the beginning we'll be dealing with a system that's looking at water changes versus some of the other Triton type systems. We'll talk about those later though. This was a fun slide, a little bit about the morals too, but I always got a kick out of it. It was an article in Practical Fish Keeping in the UK. Take responsibility, damn it, and just reminds us that we're solely responsible for the animals that we keep alive. And that starts with the equipment that we're choosing. I have an old high school buddy right now emailing me from Michigan like, I'm going to set up a 220-gallon tank. And I'm like, why? You've never kept an aquarium before. And he's like, because it's going to be sick, you know? And I'm like, why? And every step we take, he's just doing things, you know, in a cheap manner, as cheap as possible, and I know that it's going to bite him. So we're taking a step back and kind of getting into these discussions. Is it affordable long term, or is it cheap right off the bat? And these are kind of the differences you're going to see right off, you know, immediately. Your cheap stuff, in my experience, just falls apart. There's no support, there's no replacement parts, they're inefficient, they're dangerous, and it works just past the warranty. A lot of these companies can get away with this stuff because this industry, hobby, unfortunately has a really fast turnover. You know, within a year, I think it's a year and a half is your average lifespan in this hobby over time. So when I'm just going to throw out, you know, Bob's Aquarium Pumps sees that. Why would we build a pump when 90% is out within a year and a half that's going to last longer than that? It doesn't make much business mindset. But those of us that want to keep those fish that we just saw that'll easily live 5 plus 20 to 20 years, you know, we know that this stuff isn't going to work for us. So immediately we should just take our budget and put it to affordable quality equipment that's going to get our fish, get our corals to that longer lifespan. So on the left we have a power cord of a cheap power head. It's literally being eaten away. It's now turned into plankton in your reef. Who knows what that's doing in your system? Your corals are eating it, your fish might be eating it. But we see that in about 50% of the kind of like super cheap stuff. Your super cheap eBay stuff, I guess you could say. I'm not going to throw any names out there. But it is important that during maintenance we inspect everything because this is a more expensive, higher quality pump. And occasionally they're going to have issues too. So while it's important to choose the good stuff, or at least the better stuff off the bat, we do have to keep in mind that everything's going to fail. I'm going to fail, right? Your tank's going to fail. This roof's going to fail. It's just when, not if. So we really want to keep a good eye on it. I'm friends with the owner of this company, and he sent me a little note after MACNA when I shared that. Tim did. He's like, can you not do that again? I said, no, this is important stuff. Keep in mind that all aquarium manufacturers' equipment, it's their job to sell us stuff. It's not their job to keep our aquariums going long term. The good brands will build equipment that's going to last longer, right? For sure. But it's still their job to sell you that new gen when it comes out. They have really good marketing departments now. When we used to look into the practical fish keeping, you know, the ads were hilarious. It was like your late night infomercial type stuff. Now we have Ecotech with these like glorious big spreads, and it's beautiful, and it makes me want to buy stuff that I don't need. So just keep in mind that it's their job to sell you equipment. And Ecotech's phenomenal, by the way. I absolutely love them. Not hating on them. And their marketing's phenomenal too. R&D in this industry is getting so much better than where it was a decade ago or even 5 years ago, but oftentimes new equipment's still released pretty fresh. So if I'm putting anything on my personal tank, I'm going to wait for it to be out about a year. I'm going to see where it fails. I'm going to see those immediate next-gen updates. I'm going to see how many software blah blah blahs were required, and you know, 9 to 12 months that product's probably pretty refined. And I try to I've tried to put it in the air even for our company at Tenji, like we should not be putting this stuff in the field till we're really secure with it. When it comes to choosing your equipment, longevity and sample size is very important. Again, you guys have a great shop here with Kenny at the helm, and he knows what's going on. Forums are everywhere these days. Trust sample size versus one person that's had one aquarium that posts 25 times a day on a forum, right? Like, you had one aquarium ever, dude, and that's not replicatable. You can't just parrot this information and expect it to work for everyone. So trust the sample size, and make sure that you're looking at like tenured public aquarists and industry professional. Expert hobbyists are great because they're typically very willing to share their experience, and they're excited to do it as well. But make sure they have the time. Make sure they have the sample size. Social media is fun to navigate. We all know that. Election season, what have you. In our world, it's no different. It's not rare to come around to some forum and someone be like, "Why does my coral look funny?" And someone be like, "It's ick." It's like, no, dude, it's coral. Like, what are you talking about? But we see it every day. So just make sure that the information that you're reading is sound. You've done your due diligence to understand that it's decent. And then if you are going to help others, please do. Please share it. Source it. Just throw up an article. Anything I'm talking about, anything you guys will ever hear in this industry, somebody's written something on it. There's not a ton of new stuff coming out regularly, and source it. Throw a bulk reef supply video link or whatever so that new aquarists can understand where that information comes from. It's not just Austin said this one thing randomly and now it sticks. All right, planning stages. I get a lot of questions from new clients or new aquarists about planning stages. I just want a tank. Well, why do you want a tank? What brought you to getting a tank? So for me, Pomacanthus nivarchus is why I got a saltwater aquarium. I saw juvenile fish, angelfish, and that fish like lit something up inside of me. Like, I'm getting excited thinking about it right now, right? And that was 20 plus years ago. That's why I had to have an aquarium. So when the young man at the local fish store that day said a 50-gallon tank would work great, whew, you know, these fish get that big. And unfortunately, I didn't have that fish for terribly long. It did move on. I didn't kill it, thankfully. But what animals do you have to keep? Why do you want an aquarium? Let's start the conversation there. My opinion, it's easiest to be most successful and happy long-term when we have an idea of why we're doing this. And honestly, it is okay to just say, I just want a pretty reef tank. Great, okay. So the animals you want to keep are pretty coral. Good, that's fine, that's a great answer. My buddy that I'm dealing with in high school right now is like, I just want a big tank. Why? Is there a big fish? Is there a big coral? No, I just want this big-ass tank. That's silly. You know, you're going to spend a lot of money, he's going to take it down in 6 months, and it's never going to look good. Let's have like some type of direction here. So I think when we have that question answered, I can go any direction with any client, and we really get somewhere fast. It's not Pokemon. You don't got to catch them all, right? And like all these corals, all these fish will not cohabitate well together. What's your budget? If you don't budget for quality equipment, you're going to have a bad time. Like, I guarantee you that. I absolutely guarantee you that. And we're not talking about, Austin says I need to buy the Bentley of everything. No, I don't have the Bentley of anything. But we should probably get into the Honda versus, you know, the used Fiesta that's breaking down or whatever. And so that's well, we'll have that slide in a second here, but think about your budget early on, and it's a scary thing to think about. I don't want to budget for a new aquarium, but it is important to know what can we actually throw at this thing here. Will you perform the maintenance, or can you locate the filtration remotely? How are you going to access this stuff? Who's going to do it? And how much space do you have to work with? So many times they get brought into a project and it's like, well, this pump's back here, but I haven't been able to get to it in 2 years because I had to put this reactor here. What? Why would you do that? Now you have to cut out your plumbing to get to a pump? Like, and we see this a lot. I don't know why. You know, anything you put on your tank has to be maintainable. I think for most of us here, including me at home, this is a giant tank for most of us in our homes, right? We're not going to deal with this. But in a public aquarium or some of these places, you see stuff that's 8 feet buried back there that you can't even turn on or off anymore. So, you know, let's get the planning stages done, and that's where our design sets come in. But there's simpler ways to do it as well. So these considerations should be made early on to make sure all the equipment is easily serviceable long term. If it's not easy to service, you're not going to do it. Even when it is easy to service, sometimes we don't do it, right? So one of the most common things we hear about planning stages and setting your budget is buy the biggest tank you can afford. I think that's a kind of good old wives' tale type thing. I think it's a decent thing. We could still maybe save from time to time. But the experience I've seen is let's see that 200-gallon tank you're dying to have. Let's talk about a 100-gallon tank. Because if you split that goal dream tank size in half. Now, when you start talking about everything to support that dream size tank, your budget's probably already there, you know, and we don't have to start pushing and pulling on as many things. So I personally find like 120-ish gallon reef tank is fantastic size for a lot of home hobbyists, depending on what you're trying to keep. I've seen so many people go from a 120 to a 180, 240-ish, and they're out in 6 months because it is a lot more water to maintain, to deal with. Your aptasias go quicker, like the whole thing's more. You know, so that's just my little mantra, and most of the time a client is excited by the time we're done because now they can get the best lights, the best pumps, you know, if we just shrink the tank size. That's my wife, by the way. That's at Steinhardt, super cool tank. The one thing here, they didn't hire us. There's a giant seam right there, Mac. Yeah, you got a giant seam in your acrylic, man. That's never going away. All right, so the basis of anything that I'm designing is the KISS method. It's never failed me. This mantra's been around for a while, and I just love it. When it comes to equipment, this is what we focus on. The more equipment we can eliminate, the less you have to maintain, and the less chance of catastrophic failure you'll have, and the less expensive it is to set up. So for a long time, the industry was kind of like getting all these really cool new devices, more and more stuff to add on, and before I knew it, I didn't even know what I'm looking at, and all of a sudden I'm troubleshooting all of this crazy stuff when at the end of the day, I just want to see my angelfish happy swimming around in the tank. You know, why am I doing this with a pump, and what the hell is a firmware? Like when I first heard that word, it still gives me PTSD. I know what it is now, but it still gives me PTSD. There's been a lot of renovations we've been in, and you know, someone would have an algae issue, and okay, I'm going to put a reactor in, and here's a pump, we're going to plumb that in. Now I got a carbon, I need carbon here, new pump for that, new pump for this, and before you know it, this guy, he was getting electrocuted when he touched his tank, when he touched his sump. And he calls me over, and I'm just like, dude, all right, who's going first? You know, I said, you know, you can check this with a multimeter, right? What do you mean? And he was going there, and that's not it, and unplugging, that's not it. So this was 14 pumps that we removed from this tank. We replaced it with 2 pumps. I've done a lot of these over the years. I've still never done one more aggressive than this, so I still use this slide. It was kind of a lot. But yeah, two pumps replaced all of that. I think we reduced power consumption by like 80-ish%. The system was running much smoother. He did a couple foolish things since we've been involved, but yeah, just having the foresight and in planning stages, you know, don't add things on. Start fresh. You might not utilize 100% of it, but then you can always, like with reactors, we'll talk about it in a bit, you want them, so when you need them, you don't wind up with this. We definitely focus on an efficient circuit versus throwing the kitchen sink like that last slide. So this is a super simple, typical-ish reef tank we would do now. This was from an old vendor we used in Michigan. This is like 75-ish gallon tank. So your overflow comes down, goes through a sock, goes over, it hits your heater, your protein skimmer, your supply pump, goes back up. I think there's a UV on the back side of the stand, back up and into the tank. Keep it a nice circuit versus pump here, pumping over there, pumping that there, pumping that there. You're fine to have dedicated pumps for a reactor. Just keep in mind what you're doing with the system. And with the water flow going through the sump, does that little pump feeding the reactor even have time to treat the water before it's sucked up by the supply pump? Like, how is our circuit working? Where's the water going? So versus throwing on a bunch of extra stuff, I like to keep it simple, because I'm stupid sometimes. When it comes to the tanks, we kind of talked about water being what we're actually keeping, so I've always found that your source water is the most important thing we need to look at. You can have the best tank, everything, T's crossed, I's dotted, and if we're dealing with subpar RODI water, we've seen certain fish stores selling RODI water that was like 25 to 50 TDS, and you're just like, whoa, who knows what's that? Yeah, that's why you got some issues. So source water is a good thing that you can take home and make it pretty easy, or if you're getting it from a fish store, TDS meters are $12, take it to the fish store and measure it there and make sure that they're giving you the water that you want. I don't get too caught up in how many stages does a filter have. I would say for most of us, a 4-stage filter is going to work really great. When I came on to Tenji, I quickly realized we were overselling these types of units. You can keep adding additional things on there, but at the end of the day, our only goal is 0 TDS water. That's it, 0 TDS. For most of you, I could probably go to your home and set you up with one canister that would take you to 0 TDS. That's just DI. Straight in, straight out. The thing is, you're going to burn it up after about 5 gallons of water. Your DI is just going to cook. So every filter is made to protect the next filter in line. So your pre-filter, Looks like this on here. Your sediment filter comes first. Then we go into carbon. That's going to remove our chlorines, chloramines, and so forth. Then we feed our RO membrane. The membrane's being protected by these filters. If we could feed water right to it, it would just deplete faster. And then we feed to our DI. DI is being protected by all three filters. So that's the way I like to think of it. It's just to protect the DI. We just need 0 TDS water at a certain rate. So if you have a big tank, you probably want it faster than a little tank. But past that, there's a lot of confusion around RODI. Just keep it as simple as you can. Once you have your RODI made, we have to consider our salt. That's kind of important for saltwater aquariums. Synthetic sea salts have come a long way since I started. I think, honestly, you can be successful with any quality salt. I definitely recommend testing it, as you get in new batches and so forth, making sure it's consistent. I get asked all the time, so I'll say it. We're currently using Red Sea Blue Bucket salt. I think it's a great salt. I've been successful with Instant Ocean. I've been successful with ESV. I've used Fritz. I've used probably every salt under the sun at some point, because if we're dealing with a client in Maine or Florida, or we've got a couple in Hawaii using natural seawater. I know Kenny's using natural seawater here. We've seen a lot of success with that too. Use what works for you, but understand that the water, what we start with, is going to make or break everything else. Once you have your RODI and you have your salt, you gotta put it somewhere. And this is probably, in my experience, the biggest reason people don't do water changes. Because as most of us are starting, we're doing it in a 5-gallon bucket with a wooden spoon in our kitchen, and we're getting yelled at, and we're spilling everywhere. And then the salt's too high, and the temp's too low, and then this, and then that, and it's just a mess. So I think the biggest and best investment anyone can do for a home tank, whether it's a large custom system or a simple brute trash can with wheels on it, get yourself a reservoir that you can mix up your water. My personal tanks, I get some cringing from this. My personal tanks, I have 100% water change ready to go at any time. Right? The fish that I keep, they're my babies, and if something's happening and I'm out of town, which happens all the time, someone can go over there, hammer out 100% water change, they're going to be fine. You have your source water figured out, now it's time to talk about an aquarium. I've got clients who say, I want to talk about this pump, but I don't have my source water or my tank or anything else figured out. I don't care about the pump yet. Let's get you your water, then we'll talk about the tank. So this is a My Reef Creation tank. They're just one of many vendors who can build a great tank, but my personal favorite is called a hybrid aquarium. So it's going to have a PVC bottom, it's going to have glass panes, and it's going to have an acrylic lid. Planet Aquariums makes the same type of tank with a stainless steel powder coated lid, also very strong. But basically your glass sits into these CNC routed channels in the top and bottom that it's captured. So the glass has silicone on 3 sides, it can't go anywhere. I'm not saying these are the only way to do tanks. My personal tank is not like this right now, but they're pretty rad. And the important thing to think about when we're talking about display tanks is how thick is it. That's why when you see a little bit thicker tank, it's astronomically more. The glass is a lot more expensive. This is a beautiful rimless tank here. The only contact space that it has is this pane to this pane here, right? So it's going to be a thicker glass to afford more silicone contact. If it had a frame on it, it could probably be a little bit thinner. It's going to take the cost of the aquarium down, but you don't have this cool rimless look to it. So just keep that in mind when we see really cheap tanks. There's a reason they're really cheap tanks. If we're setting these up to have our fish live and our corals live as long as possible, and we're getting a really cheap tank, you better have 2. You might need 3. I don't know. I really like these hybrid tanks, though. They've done wonders for us in seismic zones. Standard versus low iron glass was a really big debate for a long time. I think low iron glass is so commonplace now that a lot of manufacturers are just running with it. My personal experience is that it does scratch a hair easier. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a selling point for it. But what is a selling point for it is I've never walked up to a standard glass aquarium and been like, ugh, this is garbage. It's not Starfire. If it's a cool tank, it's a cool tank. And I love Starfire. I actually have a tank being built with Starfire right now. The manufacturer convinced me into it. I didn't want it. He's like, you'll love it. Fine. And I'm paying more for it. But at the end of the day, it's not going to make or break your tank. So if you get into a discussion, and I've seen it a few times where it's like 25-ish% more for a Starfire tank, ask yourself, should that budget be put to the glass that I'm honestly only going to ever know when it's against a white background, which will never happen unless you put a white piece of paper in your tank. Is that a good place for me to be putting 25% of my budget? Or do I go with something that's less likely to scratch, and now I can put more of my budget into some of these other aspects? This is a pretty typical off-the-shelf tank. You guys might recognize that manufacturer. Some off-the-shelf tanks have had some issues over the years, you know. Some of them are really well built. My recommendation is do your research. If you were to do some quick digging on tanks like this, you would probably go another way. And it doesn't take a lot to research it. Find the brand. This is a conversation I'm having with my high school buddy right now. He's like, I found this 220 for $300 or something. And I was just like, dude, sorry?
Is that an Oceanic?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Start with an A.
We'll talk later. One of the things to keep in mind, this tank is a 300-gallon tank. They have it drilled with 2 1-inch drains. What are you going to do with that? Like, we have to understand that, you know, what's our flow rate going to be? So in the planning stages, that's a very early on thing we look at public aquariums. What's your flow rate? What the animals are you going to be keeping in here? How fast do we have to reduce the ammonium? We don't talk about that in the hobby too much, but that's what we have to look at. So what's our flow rate? And our flow rate's based on the holes in the bottom of the tank. How much water can we get through the bottom and up through the top? This tank, if it's coming home with me, needs 2-inch drains on each side minimum. And I'm going to put a 2-inch drain here and an 1.5 inch back up. And I'm going to put a 2-inch drain here and an 1.5 inch back up. And then whatever side supply lines I want. So that if one of these drains does wind up clogging up, this tank doesn't turn into a waterfall. So just be really mindful of those types of aspects when you're looking at this. This tank also doesn't come with any tops in your overflows. Can't tell you how many fish I've had to catch out of these overflows. You know, all these little things kind of add up. So when we're looking at maybe a more affordable tank, let's understand why are we getting that more affordably. Even big tank manufacturers have the best laid intentions when it comes to tank design, but unless you've seen it so many different times, there's little things we don't think about. We're going to talk about tops on an aquarium here. Next slide, Kenny. And Kenny and I were just talking about this tank's getting a top very soon. I'm a huge fan of tops. This is my friend Metro Cat in New York. She had a really beautiful new rhomboid wrasse. She waited for a couple years for it to come in. It was conditioned by a good buddy of ours. She had a nice screen top on it just for this fish, custom made. The fish jumped, hit the screen's top, got stuck on the top of the overflow, and cooked under her light. That overflow is like, I don't know, 3 inches wide. It's really small. It's a pretty, you know, shallow overflow in that tank, and she came home to that. So I had actually already been doing this, but I didn't have the visual prior to it. But in a custom tank, you bring the overflow up to where it's going to hit your screen. You put a top on it so that, and then your overflow teeth can be lower. But the acrylic or whatever the overflow is made of actually comes up higher, so the fish cannot jump and wedge themselves in there. If they hit the top, they go right back in the tank. They can't get in the overflow because there's a top on it, and there's no warming tray for them to land on. I don't know. So it's a bummer. But these are the kind of things when we look around at different tanks, you know, can that happen? How do we get away with that? I had a couple of aquarists that had seen this slide, and they just sent me pictures of a PVC plate or ABS plastic. They just cut and glued to the top of their thing and brought it right up. Perfect. Might not be the coolest looking thing, but now your fish can't get stuck. Tops. I'm a big fan of tops. I think we owe it to them. You know, it's like a seatbelt. These guys don't know when we're running the vacuum that we're just cleaning the floor, you know, and they're going to come straight out of the tank. I've had every fish that I've been told since I was a kid won't jump. I've had a 16-inch lionfish come out of a tank right at my face. Seahorse can't jump. If you really don't want to cut top, keep a seahorse. They can't jump. I've seen anglerfish even jump, and I was told anglerfish can't jump. Tops can be super sexy nowadays too. Like, this thing's so cool. This is a rimless tank. It just sits on here in these tabs. It's got a little feeding port. They can custom make it to any size. And again, it's my personal opinion that it's just an easy way to keep them in the tank once we go through quarantine, go through shipping, get them feeding, get them living, get them acclimated to their friends, and then they're like, bloop. It's like, oh shit, you know, that's all for naught. Once we have the tank sorted, we have a way to keep our fish in the tank. We're going to look at the sump, or the filter sump. When in doubt, stick to the KISS method. I see a lot of marketing departments getting involved now. They're looking cool, they're really pretty. I dig it. I want to open the hood on my car and it look pretty and you know, enjoy what's under there, nerd out with my friends when we're looking under there. But don't buy a sump that has extra baffles just to have baffles. Right, like there are specific reasons for anything in a sump, and if you're not sure, you know you're not going to use it, go the simpler route, go the more affordable route, because I promise you, we're being told that we need a lot of these things that we don't. And it's pretty easy to collect some of our budget and keep that aside by just going with something simple. But do go with something that if you come up in the middle of the night and you kick your sump, you don't have a flood. You know, if we're using a Petco glass tank, that can get us by, and they're great, and I've used them for years, and I'm using them for quarantine right now, but I know that if I accidentally hit my key on it or my belt or whatever it is, that might be the end of that sump. So when we've spent all this time plumbing everything in, and it's the sump, the heart, the life support of our system, and we break it one night because we're being silly, that's a real bummer. So acrylic sumps go a long way. They're hard to break. All right, they're stronger. They're going to be a better at keeping temperature stable than a glass tank will, and there's a million of them now to choose from, and honestly you can get them very affordably and well built in my opinion, and they can look cool too. I mean, that's super rad. My personal favorite is a polyvinyl chloride sump or a PVC sump. There's a few manufacturers making these. There's one we work with specifically consistently, that's MRC, My Reef Creations, out of Atlanta, Georgia. These are the strongest sumps you can get. You can smack them with a hammer and they're probably going to be okay. We've personally, never had any major issues with them, and you can do cool things like implement UV directly into them. You can put moving biobeds into them. They're all custom designed. There's no one off-the-shelf unit for these guys at this time. And then they are overbuilt, so they can literally support extra weight of big skimmers. This was actually a small one for what we did here, and it's got a media chamber on top too. Just a super, super clean way of doing things. And you hide a lot of it too. So MRC calls this the iSump line, like the iPhone, because it's just kind of a all-in-one, really pretty setup. We've done several exhibits at public aquariums where one main system will have the iSump, and then the quarantine systems have fiberglass sumps or something, and the board comes through and they're like, "The hell did you sell us here? What is this?" It's like, well, it'd be 4 times as more if we did this everywhere. Okay, this looks great. But these do just really set apart when it comes to a nice big display tank. And just to show how strong they are, they send me photos like this all the time. So that's one of ours being held up by the baffles only inside the tank. That was like 12 feet long by 4 feet tall by 3 feet wide, something like that. There's a lot of plastic hanging from straps, and they just don't go anywhere. So they're really, really solid sumps. Inside the sump, we're going to look at some other little pieces of equipment. Pre-filters are a fantastic addition in your sump. They catch food and waste prior to settling. Pre-filters are only good if we're cleaning them. If we let them settle and they sit there and collect crap forever, there's just don't use them. They're going to do you more harm than good. But when they're used correctly, they're absolutely phenomenal. Nowadays, they have automated versions of these. Some of you guys probably saw. I was looking at one back here with Kenny. Automated fleece filter roller. I think they're super cool, and I'm really excited to hear about Kenny's experience. If you guys have experience, tell me. I want to hear it. My personal experience was 5-6 years ago, and I felt like I was cleaning and fixing the darn thing every day. The KISS method was not being respected with this device, so it went away. We are currently testing an industrial unit that I have pretty high hopes for. It does not abide by the KISS method. It does have additional moving parts that are not required. So I'm going to be a tough sell on those things, but I think they're really cool. And if you tell me I don't have to clean filter socks, I'm going to listen. Protein skimmer is the digestive tract of our life support system. It does the heavy lifting outside of water changes if we're going to abide by big time water changes. They remove excess food, waste, and other organic compounds prior to breaking down in the algae fuel. They're actually a mechanical filter as much as anything. Some people don't realize that, but they help clarifying the water. They're pulling out a lot of detritus, waste, uneaten food, things of that nature. And the pump of the protein skimmer is arguably the most important part. You could have a super fancy body with all these bells and whistles, and if you have well, my experience is some of these subpar DC pumps coming out on $600, $700, $800 skimmers are trash. I mean, they're dying within a year or two, and I'm on the phone trying to deal with them, and I'm just like, I will gladly take a $400 AC-powered pump that's going to last for 8 years, never have to clean it. Maybe once a year you clean the pump. I don't get sucked into the marketing stuff too much. With that said, this is one of the best skimmers I've ever ran. This is a DC-powered skimmer. It's a Bubble King skimmer, a little bit older gen of theirs, but it's rock solid. Also, as you know, most of my work's public aquarium science centers. We don't care if things are loud necessarily. So when they're in our living rooms, when they're in our kitchen, when you need spousal approval, use a DC pump, but have an extra one there. Maybe 2 if you need it. You know, just be prepared, because they're not the workhorses that I grew up with. You know, like when I saw pumps start having a 1 or 2 year warranty, I said that's garbage. I have one right here for 5 years, no questions asked, from the Eheim 1262. That thing's last forever. They're loud as hell. It sounds like you're running a blender in the next room. You know what I mean? So you got to make that choice. But a good skimmer will go a very, very long way. Auto top offs in your sump. Nowadays, probably everybody's heard of auto top off. It was kind of a new thing for a while when I started. We started with 2-liter bottles turned upside down with a little valve on the bottom. You gravity drip into your sump, and you'd hope that it didn't spill in your sump. There's a bazillion ways to do it. I personally am a huge fan of the Tenji osmolator. That's the only thing I've ever personally had fail on it is the pump stopped working, so it didn't fail on. I have many stories of major floods. Mark Callahan, Mr. Saltwater Tanks, good buddy of mine, he has the best story. His client went on vacation. He had an auto top off float from his RODI right into his sump, and he went on vacation for 7 or 8 days, and he came back to a basement flooded, 6 feet of water. Pumped like 6,000 some odd gallons, like a $2,000 bill, just destroyed this guy's entire home. And that's not the only time I've heard of that. So don't link your RODI to a float on your sump. If you've done this, go home tonight and please take it off, or put a valve in there, do something like that. Do anything, make it redundant.
Like it just kept going.
It just kept going. He was in Florida having time, you know, and his basement's filling up. It was the RODI just kept filling up his basement all week long. So this last slide, this is our reservoir. Then this is our tanker sump. We fill up the reservoir. I put floats on these directly from my RODI, right? So I will turn on my RODI. I will let this fill up while I'm at work or whatever. Whip, it kicks that float off. I have a drain hooked to this if that float fails, so it goes outside. But then there's a valve between the RODI and the float here, and I turn that. And then for the next week, 10 days, 14 days, this little pump's filling, and this water level comes down, comes down, comes down, comes down, comes down. And then when I need it, I turn that valve back on. RODI fills it up from a float, turns it off. This valve is what's preventing the RODI from just running if that float failed. So that valve's only turned on. My personal one's like 5 gallons. Most of our clients are 20-ish gallons. So we're only running it for 8 hours or so to fill up, not even that most of the time. And then we're turning it off, and then it's off for a week, 10 days. You know, and then slowly but surely we're filling this up. And auto top off, if you guys aren't using them, they're so great. It just keeps your tank ultimately as stable as possible when it comes to compensating for evaporation and salinity. Quick note on parameters. I get into this conversation more often than I would think. Your salinity is your most important parameter. If I have a lot of people, my alkalinity is all whacked out, my calcium's doing something weird, my magnesium's way low, and then we find out their salinity is like 1.020 density or something. I'm like, ah! If you're not at reef levels, which is 35 part per trillion or 1.026 density, all of your other levels will be whacked out or skewed. So just try and run those reef levels and then start determining where everything else is. Auto top-offs help keep our salinity super stable. There's my Tenji osmolator. I use these on nano tanks too, the full version. I want 1 stage of redundancy, 2 stage of redundancy, and this has a timer built in. If both of these fail, this will only pump for, I'm gonna say X amount of time, because I don't remember what it is. A minute? It's a minute. And there's a jumper in here too. You can adjust that. I've never adjusted it. So you have 3 things that have to fail before your little reservoir starts dumping. 30 seconds, okay. I only had to change it once when we used a bigger pump. Yeah, yeah. But they're great. And when the one thing that has failed the pump, I think it's like 15 bucks to replace that pump. And these units, I mean, I have the same one I'm using right now, I think I bought in like 2006. It's the same thing. I've never replaced anything on it. The power cord got a little corrosion on it, and I used some alcohol and cleaned it. That was it. Return pump, well, they're pretty important. They're bringing our water back from the sump up to the tank. They're bringing the filtered water back. But some people get way too caught up in turnover numbers. I need 10x, I need 2x, I need 4x. And that's going to be how many times does the water pass through the sump per hour. So if we have a 100-gallon tank and it's going through the sump twice per hour, we're going to call that 2x turnover. For ammonia control, technically at Tenji, we look at you need at least a half-hour turnover to control ammonia properly in your average tank. Most of you guys are going to be running way more flow than that. But when we're dealing with a 10,000-gallon tank, you can't run 100,000 gallons per hour through a sump. That's a fire hydrant. So don't get too caught up in sump turnover numbers. Honestly, nowadays, the most consistent numbers in sump turnover I see in a reef tank is 2 to 3x. Maybe 4x on the higher end. This is like Worldwide Corals is using this. All the big farmers are using it. We're using it in our own reefs. Do you know what you guys are running at MBA in the reef tank? Less, yeah. So he's even less than that, you know? So we use these to get our filtered water back up to the tank, but we're not using them for in-tank flow. In-tank flow is very, very different. Oh, quick note on these. I actually learned this from Matt back in the day. If you want something to look at when we're matching our flow rate, Matt likes to match the flow rate from his supply pump to the flow rate of the skimmer. And then that way we know that every bit of water going through this to the supply pump has been skimmed, right? We're meeting those two equally. Is that do you have to lose sleep over that? No, but that is a fun little thing to target if you want to look at numbers. Just don't get caught up in chasing those numbers. This is how we're really keeping our reefs alive, right? Even in fish tanks, we need in-tank flow. In one of the biggest advancements I personally had in quarantining, like $10,000 angelfish and so forth, was actually increasing the flow in a quarantine tank. I never thought about it, but they're used to the ocean. They come home and they sit in our little boxes with an air bubbler in it. Their metabolism slows down. They're not acting the same. Everything's different. So we really need to replicate at least somewhat what they're seeing in the ocean. Don't be afraid to turn these things up. I have a friend, Chris Jury, who's a coral researcher in Hawaii, and he's like, Austin, if you're not turning up the flow to literally rip tissue from the tips of your SPS once a day, then that's not what they're seeing in the ocean. So turn it up. And I'm like, dude, I'm not going to tell my clients to shred the tissue off the end of their coral. Like, that's too much flow, right? But just below that is kind of where we want to be. There are exceptions. We don't want our half-inch clownfish sitting like this on the glass, right? Like, you have to give everybody a chance to do their thing. But that's also why that half-inch clownfish needs to be grown out and given an opportunity to get some muscle before we put it in a tank like this. We need to give it the ability to thrive, and we need these pumps to be on in the meantime. So it's, captive bred fish are beautiful, they're amazing, they're coming in really small. They work great in like a social acclimation box in the corner or a quarantine tank in your garage or basement. But in-tank flow is super, super important. There's two kinds of in-tank flow we look at, or patterns. One, and I dance for you guys, one's laminar flow. So laminar flow just does this. And then you have your alternating flow, and so alternating flow does this, right? Back and forth, back and forth. Laminar is directional, alternates back and forth. But reality, the reef is both. So you have alternating laminar flow. That's what it's doing on the reef, right? And so I see some tanks with, like this is a perfect example. These are pointed at one another, and so they're getting fantastic laminar flow, alternating flow, but we're getting the laminar flow from the supply pump here. So if you look at the water in this tank, it is going back and forth, but it's also moving in a direction. And in really big tanks, we don't put the pumps on opposite ends typically, we'll put them on one end. And then we'll step it and create just like this massive underflushing gyre. And these are like, 20-foot long tanks by 8 by 8 or something. So big tanks.
Two gyres on the back.
Two gyres on the back too. And so just pay attention when our pumps are, we want our pumps to work together, and we want to create that alternating laminar flow throughout the whole thing. If you do that in front of your tank, they'll be happy too. So that's what we're trying to do, and I have seen, these are great. The vortex are going to talk to one another on this tank, so you can probably have them dancing with one another. But if we have two static pumps on the same side pointing at one another, they're going to do a lot better on the same side, pointing at the same way, right? Because we're building that massive flow up. As far as flow, what does it mean? How fast should things go? I want to see a piece of food hit the substrate, bounce across the bottom, and suck back up into the water column, and kind of keep doing that. And hopefully a fish will eat it, maybe a coral will grab it, or it winds up in our overflow. If we're seeing 50% die and hit the bottom and just start collecting in one piece, we need more flow. That's kind of how I'm judging it, and I can look at tanks pretty quick, and honestly, I'd say probably half the tanks that we get involved with don't have enough flow. And that doesn't mean it doesn't look good. It just means, things would be doing better if we kicked up the flow. These tanks look great, by the way. You've had a lot of flow in all these tanks. Lighting, it's not debated as much as it used to. People used to get in like battles over this. But there's no reason for anyone to get into battles over it. And that's in terms of T5, halides, LEDs. Plasma was a thing for a while. How many of you have a plasma light over your tank? Yeah, I know that went away really quick. Yeah. Yeah, they were crazy. They had like these little diodes, and you could put a hole in the wall. They were wild, man. I saw one over, this might be, they call it like a light mover. You remember light movers? So the light rail would kind of go around like this, and I saw a plasma light on that, and you could actually see like where it was right above the coral because it was bleaching out. It was crazy. I truly believe that you can be successful with any quality light source. And that doesn't mean brand, that doesn't mean cost, that doesn't mean LED T5 halide, that means quality. I can't answer specifically if X, Y, and Z is a quality brand because I've never used them. We do use some independent studies that help show us. We use a lot of behind the scenes talk with cohorts at public aquariums, what works for you, what doesn't. What happens in public aquariums and science centers behind the scenes with these types of lights is very different than what happens in our clean living rooms with very low humidity. So what I'm going to put in the back of an aquaculture facility in Australia that has 100% humidity and it sometimes rains sideways through the building is going to be different than what I put in a home residence in San Francisco. We really like Ecotech products. They are very expensive, but they stand by them and they're great. If you ask me what we would normally use, if we're called, nowadays we're using radions on most smaller reefs, and we use max spec commercial LEDs on big reefs. Those are the big, they're like this big, and they're like 50 pounds. They're pretty cool. But there's many styles of LEDs, and some might suit a specific need better than another. So when controllability is not required, you can't beat a Reef Bright strip, in my opinion. I'm growing corals out of the water in multiple exhibits with just 50/50 Reef Bright strips. The spectrum's not the most exciting thing in the world, admittedly, but the corals freaking love it. And they're on a very, very basic timer, on, off. No firmware updates, no shenanigans involved with those. You can be, oh, yep, I already said that. You can be successful with any light. This is a buddy's system that I help him do and redo a couple times, and he loves T5s, just kind of like the consistency of them. And then he threw some Reef Brights on the end, and it really made everything pop. And he was happy with that kind of like hybrid thing. I always joke with him, saying, you don't need all of this. Now we've actually gone to, he's got multiple radions with LED strips outside the radions. And I think he just likes to tinker, which is cool. But again, I'm simple. Keep it simple, stupid. So just be sure not to torch your corals with whatever light you're getting. As I discussed, it's easier to do nowadays. I honestly think most reefs are overlit. Dana Riddle has some really good data out there that he's looked at corals in nature. What do they actually photosynthesize? What are they actually doing? What do they need? Corals need about 4 hours of high light. That's their happy place. 4 hours of highlight, and if we have controllable lights, you can do an hour ramp before, an hour ramp afterwards. Your corals are going to be thriving. The color is going to be phenomenal. After that, it's more or less for aesthetics, and we're going to be growing some algae, which is going to be stuff for us to clean. Now, who wants to only look at their tank for 4 to 6 hours a day? Half of that time you might be at work. None of us are going to do that, right? But just keep in mind that's what it needs. So when I'm talking with clients, I'm in a constant battle with a couple clients in public spaces, and they're just like, oh no, 14 hours or bust, Austin. I say, bust. I don't want this tank. This is a nightmare. Like, if you want to have a refugium, have a refugium, but if you want a display aquarium, we can control that light. Public aquariums, you walk around, science centers, you walk around, tell me how many tanks you see in front of big windows and things of that nature. There's a reason they're dark. They can completely control the light, they control the photo period, and they can control the amount of algae that gets scrubbed. So yeah, just keep in mind, corals probably don't need as much light as we're giving them oftentimes, and all these guys will tell you that too. These are my friends. These are old-time farmers of corals in the industry. I've been to all their facilities. I've dove with them a few times, a couple of them. There's one thing that always blows my mind about walking into these facilities is how much flow they have and how little light they roll with. All of them consistently. So Cherry Corals, Worldwide Corals in Florida, Jason Fox over in Maryland-ish? Maybe he moved. Cherry Corals is in Michigan. It's most of the Cherry Corals I was just at a few weeks ago, most of their tanks are running a couple of T5 bulbs, not too dissimilar from what's over our heads right now. Occasionally they have some Reef Bright strips. Brett is the SPS guy. He did put up some radions to really get a little extra punch going on for those. But it always amazes me how little light that they need. They'll always tell you stable water parameters and good flow are more important than putting God's flashlight over your tank. Ultraviolet sterilizers. I like to talk about UV because a lot of people don't like to talk about UV. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Even the good information is hard to get through sometimes. What I can say is that my 21 years of firsthand experience utilizing good UV sterilizers, I will never run a tank without one personally when I have I'm going to say expensive fish in it, I guess. That's kind of like my thing. I don't buy them because they're expensive. They just happen to be expensive, and it's a great insurance policy. So unfortunately, UV has been misinterpreted, and a lot of bad info has been spread out there. When it's properly applied, it not only clarifies your water column, but it can help control parasites and bacteria outbreaks on our fishes. And what we really don't hear about too often is it does the same for coral. So all the information we have from UVs is from the public drinking water. We're just stealing, borrowing the information and adapting it to our world. There's a ton of research money in keeping humans safe and our drinking water safe. That makes sense, right? Crazy, right? There's not a ton of money in looking at UVs for fish, even on aquaculture. There's zero money looking at it for hobbyists and corals. So if we want to put pool together, let me know. It'll always be anecdotal stuff. But anyways, I'm a really firm believer in this. Do you have to have one? No, you don't have to have one. But if you want to do it, there's good and bad ways to do it. And I truly believe a good one can only help your system. Sometimes we hear about, it kills the good stuff too. I'm like, what's the good stuff? What are you missing? What's it killing that I'm not seeing? What am I missing out on? Because I have like dozens of hundreds of tanks around the country that don't show me any of this. And this is just kind of a graph. You don't have to get bored with this stuff. If you're going to get into it, buy a trustworthy brand. Buy something you see in public aquariums, you see fish stores using, you see people that at least you think know what the hell they're talking about. Feel free to hit me up too. There's only a couple brands that we use because there's only a couple brands that actually put out real data. The rest of them are kind of like winging it. I've actually intentionally reached out to a couple of hobbyist things, probably for fun. And I said, what's your fluence rates? You know, what can you do with this? And they didn't even know how to answer the question. Like, you know, if you can't tell me how many miles per gallon my new car is going to get, you know, what the hell are you doing? So there's a lot of shenanigans out there, so just be careful with it. This is the PVC eye sump. That's a UV chamber there. So we go through our filter bags. 100% of the water going through this sump gets zapped. And then we're going through a moving biobed, and it's like a big sump like this, and then back to the tank. So 100% of this water gets zapped. That's how I like to implement them. Even if I'm doing like a canister version, I'm going to come out of my supply pump. I'm going to put 100% of my water through that UV and back up to the tank. That makes sure that I'm not short-circuiting it. It's really popular, and it still will work if you put a portion of your water into it, and a portion goes back to the sump or back up to the tank. That'll still work. It's just going to take longer to do its job because not 100% isn't going through. And that's, if I'm designing it from the beginning, that's typically what I'm going to do. The common thing that I'm told is that it kills a lot of the pods. I have a lot of pods in every tank that has UV, and yeah, maybe it's going to zorch them a little bit. Also, sterilization does just that. It's not killing them, it sterilizes them. So if a copepod goes through there, they're still alive when they come out, they just can't reproduce. And if you sat on that for long enough, you might not reproduce either. I don't know. This you can look right at. That is an opaque cover. It is very safe, but do not ever look at UVs for long-term exposure. It does work, and it's not good for us. Temperature control. I wrote an article a long time ago called Winter is Coming. Game of Thrones was popular then. And this guy always reminded me of, like, every time I thought of a heater for an aquarium, that was my face. I'm just like, they're evil. They can go bad. They can, you know, in a heartbeat, you can lose your tank. So it's really easy to add some redundancy. Again, I'm from Michigan, so heaters were an absolute must. Yeah, you guys need heaters here too. You know, SoCal, they're like, heaters? Whatever. So first thing that's important, there's a couple different kinds of heaters we use a lot. This has an internal temperature thermostat. So this is a standalone unit. Eheim, Ebo Jaeger, you control it up here. This guy is going to have an external thermometer or thermostat, and it'll probably have a little probe that goes in there. These should be thought of as the same thing. If this plugs into an external controller, that's not redundant. Its controller is still only one stage. This doesn't have its own thermostat. So just know what you're getting into. The easiest way to make your heater redundant, no matter if you're looking at the one on the right or the left of the last slide, is just double it up. If you need 300 watts of heat, get 250 watt heaters, and you've got 300 watts of heat. Now if one sticks on, the chances are very, very low that it's going to be able to overheat your tank. I mean, maybe in like a week, but let's check our tanks daily, guys. They're pretty close. So this is the most affordable, robust, and absolute surefire way to create a redundant heating system. If one of these dies, one of them is still going to pick up your slack, and yeah, the temperature is going to slowly drop, but it won't go down super fast. So that's the most affordable way to do it, super safe way to do it. If you want to go another step, this is what I typically do. You get a third-party controller on there as well. And you can use Apex, you can use whatever other brands people are using nowadays, the Hydros and whatnot. I still, personally, for temperature, I use an independent industrial commercial grade controller. They're a couple $100. They're a little steep in that regard, but these are the same probes being used in other industries, breweries, your dairies, that kind of thing. These are super, super robust. They're made to get wet. They have saltwater safe probes. They're very, very accurate. And for whatever reason, they've just stood the test of time. These are also like really high quality probes. I'm not going to pick on anybody, but most of the probes we see in the industry, even included with more mass controllers, are not nearly as accurate as this kind of thing. So this like just goes that extra step, and it is replaceable if you ever need it. I have my personal one's 10 years old, and I've never replaced it, and I can cross-calibrate it. This slide just shows how long those independent controllers have been out. They're super robust. I mean, I don't know if you guys, this is Julian Sprung, that's Joe Yaiulo. Like, those controllers have been around so long. Julian had hair then. You know, he's totally bald now. And Joe had more brown hair than me. Like, this slide is ages old, right? But that's the same controller I showed on the other slide. So they're really robust, and they're an absolutely just great way to back up your submersible heaters. If you have a bigger tank, you might get into an inline heater. This is from Aqualogic, who teamed up with Electro, a British company that made these super dope titanium inline heaters. But they start at about 1,500 watts. So like they're pretty big for most of our tanks. They have a couple of them that run on 115 volt. Most of these instantly go up to 220. And we've installed some like as big as me. You know, and those are big heaters. These are great though. They do have their own temperature and flow paddles in there, so they shut off when there's no flow. They have their independent temperature probe. You do just have to be really careful with them because they get really hot. But they're independently robust and redundant. Chillers, honestly, you kind of have to consider the same thing when it comes to chiller redundancy. This is a big Aqualogic ballast unit. That's for a penguin pool, actually in New York. For chiller redundancy, typically what we're going to do is you don't want to run two chillers a lot of times, and most of the time when we're running a chiller on a reef tank, for example, it's for oh crap scenarios. If weather gets really warm or something, we're never going to design a system that requires a chiller nowadays with our DC pumps, with the low heat LED lights. So we just put an alarm on your controller. You know, hey, if my chiller starts to get too cold, send me an alarm and we're good. This chiller, they spent a lot of money on. It was for penguins, and the penguins actually didn't like the cool water. So there's Joe talking smack to the penguin that they literally all sat on shore. As soon as the pool got cold, they didn't go in, and then he turned it off for a little bit and they went swimming again. It was pretty great. So you can't control what the animals like sometimes. Media reactors and sump, we touched on them a little bit earlier. I'm a big fan of putting at least one in there, even if you don't think you're ever going to use it. That way when the time comes, you'll have it. You know, I like to plumb it in line with my supply pump so that I don't have that extra pump in there. But if you're not sure, or you're just adding one down the line, there's nothing wrong with using a little MaxiJet or something, or any kind of Seche or whatever submersible pump you're into. Just don't do it 14 times like that one example, right? If you know you're going to need all that additional auxiliary equipment, plan it in advance, or maybe do a big sump redesign if you really feel you need all of that. Reactors can be used for so many different medias. That's why I like putting them in there. So GFO and carbon are your pretty common things here. GFO, as you guys know, is a phosphate reduction media. Carbon is carbon, good water clarity, helps keep smell down, and actually removes some of the coral allopathia that happens. Then we do use them for biological media at times. That's just a snapshot of the MRC biomedia, similar to CChem Matrix. You can really increase the biological capacity of your tank very quickly. A media chamber like yay big will absolutely filter about 1,000 gallons biologically of water with the proper flow rate through it. So compared to like Live Rock and all of this, if you want to have, you know, a frag tank with just egg crate or PVC plate or whatever it is, this in a reactor goes a long way for you for biological media. Coral building parameters, we looked at that slide earlier about how to keep those stable. You know, eventually water changes isn't going to cut it unless you're doing a drip system or water changes every day. Nobody wants to do that. Again, remember, I'm coming from a business mindset and having to work with people across the world and help them develop ways that's going to work for them. We're really big on two-part for that reason. A good quality two-part is going to have a lot of major and minor trace elements in it as well. B-ionic is our go-to, and it does allow us to tie in nowadays to like a Apex Trident, which is going to do your automated testing for you. Then it'll actually tell the dosing pump when to run. It's pretty cool stuff. The Trident makes these redundant, because it's not going to dose unless it says that it has to. Then we also tie these into a pH probe at times to make it redundant. If you dose too much of this stuff, your pH is going to go up, and you can turn your pump off when the probe senses that. There are lots of ways to deal with coral building parameters. Calcium reactors probably the most old school way. It's definitely well recognized still, and it's still implemented in a lot of places. We love it, but we generally don't get into it unless we're like 500 plus gallons. There's just a lot that goes into them, in my opinion, maintenance wise, but it is about what you're comfortable with. If you're an old school reefer, a lot of the old salts that I talked to, like if you mention 2-part, I'm going to throw you in the tank. Okay, fine. So we start talking about calcium reactors, and I mean, you literally melt old coral bones into the water column. It's a pretty rad way to introduce calcium and alkalinity, and so you can't hate on it. However, at times you do have some pH issues, so you might need to start playing with some calquasser, and at that point we're starting to move away from the KISS method. But it is about what you need. Don't be scared of them. If you need it, you need it. They're great. Calquasser, speaking of it, is a phenomenal way of adding your nutrients, coral building parameters back into your system. I was really stoked to see that Kenny's using it here. I had no idea. This slide was not added. This is Joe Iulu's 20,000 gallon reef tank in Long Island. This was before he broke it down and kind of redid it, destroyed it, I'm going to say. He didn't destroy it. It needed a renovation. But that tank, the entire tank is ran on calquasser. However, if memory serves, it is a 50-ish gallon brute can of calquasser just dripped into the tank every day. So he goes in and he mixes up this big thing, and it just drips into the tank every day, and that's what grows this reef. I think calquasser is great. It is getting a little bit more recognition. For us, being remote on a lot of these systems, it's really hard for us to deal with to control. Calquassers can clog up pumps. You can get some weird things happening. Or with 2-part, I can sit in New York and dose a tank in California, boop, 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 and it just doses. So again, that's the reason we're using 2-part. Calquasser works, man. It really does. And this is something I'm super excited about. A friend of mine, Ben Johnson, he's a reef beefer. I don't know if you guys listen to that at all. I somewhat respect what he says, so I like Ben a lot. He's really excited on this product, and he told me I should give it a try. We're going to be sampling it in a small reef tank in the office, and then I actually have a little something coming up this winter at home that we might be trying it in. But it's basically touted as a 1-part. It's an alkalinity, it's a calcium, it's a magnesium, and some trace elements. Is anybody here using this?
Yeah.
Yeah? You guys like it?
Yeah.
All right.
Cool for small tanks. Once you get big, though,
It's hard. Expensive. Okay. Okay.
40 gallons of less.
Okay. I mean, that's like a dream though, man. Like a freaking all-in-one thing. Ugh, gosh.
Perfect life that would work, but
Yeah. That's why my jury's out, you know. But we'll have this someday, right? Like we already have stuff like this that we never. I mean, there's a pump right here connected through the glass. What the hell is that? You know, I mean, this will come.
I use the all free for maybe 99%
Yeah.
in EBS for like
Okay.
fluctuations.
Gotcha.
Whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
Nice.
Easily just add 1 mil a day kind
Sure.
of stuff.
Sure. So for those of you who can't hear, there are people here using it, and people are saying that it's really good for up to about 40 gallons. The jury's out for anything over that. I'll get back to you. So we haven't tested it at all, and so before we test that all for one reef, we're going to really put it through its paces in the office. But I'm excited about it. It's a cool new product. I don't get excited about new products too much anymore. Rock. There's a bunch of different kinds of rock now. Again, I think you can probably be successful with any type of rock. Do your research, understand the differences. Me personally, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to use dry rock. I'm going to use Marco rock. I'm going to clean it really heavily. Might RODI soak if I have the time and I'm feeling fancy. Probably not though. And then, you know, this stuff will turn live over time. There's some really good beneficial bacteria. Comes in bottles now between Fritz, Dr. Tim's, all these different things. And you can make it live to some degree pretty quick. I will not lie, there's something magic about proper live rock. I've seen some really, really unique things that I've only seen come with live rock, but you can get a lot of unwarranted nasty crap out of real live rock as well. So do the research and make the decision based on what you're comfortable with. There's no right answer here. Don't get live rock that's being poached from somewhere illegally. Don't do that because that's the most hardcore reef raping we can do, is taking the rock out for sure. Dry rock works. The man-made rock we've had mixed experiences on. So again, do your research. I think you'll pretty quickly be able to Google what is decent and what's not. It gets some weird bacterial films and stuff like that. And we broke one open by accident, and it had like literal river aggregate in it. There was no aragonite inside that stone whatsoever. Someone went out back and made it. Substrate, again, do your research. I think the main thing nowadays to look at is your particle size. Somewhere in the middle tends to work best, in my opinion. We actually use a lot of crushed coral. Crushed coral gets a pretty bad rep in the industry, and it's like, no, it's fine. You just have to gravel vac it. You should be gravel vacuuming anything under 2 inches, or 3 inches, I should say. It's kind of shallow sand bed. I'm a big fan of shallow sand beds. I'm actually a bare bottom personal guy. I run all my personal tanks bare bottom. But again, do your research. There's no right answer here. I don't think that deep sand beds have a huge place in our hobby anymore. They do crash over time. There's no argument with that. But they can be, you can skate around that crash. So, you know, if you're interested in it, they give you a lot of buffering capacity if you do use a deep sand bed. So do your research there. But again, I don't think you can go wrong. I don't use live sand ever. Live sand is great in theory, I think, but I don't know much of anything that can survive in a sealed plastic bag. And that bacteria needs oxygen. So like, I don't know where it's coming from. So my guess, honestly, live sand I think probably can help cycle a tank a bit faster, but I think what you're getting is the ammonia from the dead bacteria in the bag. And I think that's helped spiking you really quick. So don't feel bad if you've bought it. I've bought pallets of it in the past, thousands of dollars of it, but we've moved away from it because we just don't see the huge benefits in it. Aquascape, this is obviously a really old, blasted out photo from an office 2003, I think I set this tank up. This is just a quick note on Aquascape. Don't get too caught up on it. I know we've all done it. Most of us have probably spent 24 hours at one point or another setting up a nano tank. But the reality is we should be focusing on coralscape in a reef, not aquascape. So I built these are like 2 rocks each. I kind of glued them together, and I knew what corals I was going to place. I was growing another rock in a separate nano tank next to this. I dropped in that separate rock in the middle, and then I literally had sketched out those last 2 rocks where the corals would grow, and in about 2 years we grew it into this. So a lot of your shapes, your height, how things are shadowing, there's dendrophilia you can't see under here, like everything plays into one another based on your flow and your lighting and how you're growing it. I've gotten to pretty I now have an extra contract if you want me to aquascape your tank, let's say, because there's a lot of personal feelings that get thrown around, and I've had people say, you're gonna charge me for that? And I'm like, dude, like, yeah, because I'm looking at it in 10 plus years. You're looking at it today. You know, if you want a cool rock tank that's gonna look great, build that, you know, but that's not a reef tank. And if you try and grow a cool reef tank in a cool rock tank, it's gonna suck in about a year. You're gonna be cutting everything out. Oh, so by the way, this tank did adhere to the KISS method. It was such a simple LSS. LSS is life support system, so that's your filtration. That's what we call it in the public aquarium sector, because without your life support system, life ceases to exist. But this was basically a UV, a skimmer, mesh filter sock, ESV 2-part, redundant heaters. And when we had clients come into the back of the sump and they'd be like, where's the rest of it? Like, the tank looks so good. There was no rest of it. It was so simple that people thought I was hiding something. But the secret was it just got 30% weekly water changes. That's my controller. No firmware updates. No, controllers have come a long way, man, and we really do like them now. This is the only one I trust, but because it's never failed me. You know, but I travel a lot. I mean, in March, I think I saw my wife like 2 days, you know, and we're bouncing around between projects. So if I want an aquarium at home, nowadays you need a controller. I'm not a controller fanboy, but they definitely have their place. It just depends what you want out of them, and understand how to use them. Most of all, force it to fail. What's going to happen when that thing fails? Unplug it, see what happens. Unplug something, see what happens. Turn your internet off, see what happens. Weird stuff's going to happen, and it's not going to be consistent to all of your tanks. I've seen it, and I don't know how to explain it because I'm not techie, but once you understand how your system responds to the internet going out, the power going out, a pump going down, you'll know what to do. Having a quick glance at, you know, your parameters from anywhere in the world is super frickin' cool. But what we do, we've now really started to move away from having everything plugged into them. We don't let them do a ton of controlling anymore. We're doing a lot of monitoring. Now that does depend on the client. I have one client who he wants water changes out the wazoo, all automated, and he's constantly replacing sensors and stuff. That's not an aquarium to me. That's an IT fanboy, and that's cool, and he has fun with it, but it's just so far removed from what's our goal, growing coral. But being able to open that up is an absolute dream come true. Super cool. This is my favorite controller. You know, I want the pump off. Okay, hit the switch. I want the skimmer off. Hit the switch. I want the auto top off. Hit the switch. I actually have one of these on my tank today. There's not any redundancy necessarily built into them, but for basic equipment that I only want on and running, these serve a great purpose. It is plugged into a GFI outlet, so we're protected there. And then I can kind of touch it with a damp hand, and it doesn't matter. I don't have to fumble around with my phone and get into my app and blah, blah, blah. So I'm still a big fan of these. There's lots of versions of them. As much as I like seeing the app and the parameters on there, I want to see the tank. If I can see the tank, I can tell you 10 times as much as I can with a random set of parameters. Nowadays, I use both. These cameras are so affordable now. You can use Nest, you can use whatever, and even on the Apex dashboard, I think you can put, yeah, you can put your camera there if you want. I'm not techie, I don't know how to do that, but my coworker does it, you know. But it works great, and the Nest ones actually have an automatic power outage alert. If the power goes out, you get an alert. So my Apex would tell me that, my Nest would tell me that too. LG refugiums, we don't use them. They work, absolutely they work. If you use them and you like them, use them. But my goal is to grow coral and fish, not algae. And we have enough other means of reducing nutrients, in my opinion, in a lower maintenance and upfront cost aspect, water changes. And we're doing a lot more with water changes than with algae. We're still leaving some things in the water column when we're growing algae, but they do work. Clearly, it removes nutrients, and there's some really big companies now taking advantage of good methodologies behind them. So water changes, at some point, people started dreading them, and I think it was because we all grew up doing them in 5-gallon buckets, you know, and that kind of makes it suck. So low quality salt. Also heat your water. If you heat your water up to temp before you mix it, it'll mix much faster. If you're mixing cold RODI water in a 5-gallon bucket with a wooden spoon, you're gonna have a bad time. And then once you have your bin up, you know, even if it's a simple brute can, you can use a Python hose and pump your water to your tank. You can gravel vac your water right down a drain or hook it to your sink if you want. If you're gonna put salt water down your plumbing, be careful in old homes. We typically put it outside, but make it easy on yourself, and you could make it really fancy if you want to. So we'll put plumbing in the walls sometimes. So this guy had a RODI reservoir for his auto top off on this side. That was this feed line coming from a different vessel. This was his saltwater feed line. So this was pre-mixed up to temp saltwater right into a sump. And then this was, this one was weird. It was a tri-level system. So we actually had to pump water out of it, normally a gravity feed. So this was a separate pump that literally pumped water out to do a water change, water in. So he didn't have hoses. His wife never yelled at him for anything like that. And it was really just a nice way of doing it. This was a very similar system. The sump was downstairs. So here we're looking at 2 redundant drains, one supply that's split up top. These are closed loop pumps. Ecotech Vectras plumb through the back and bottom. Ecotech Vectra here. Then we installed this as well. This was just a little barb drain that he could stick vinyl tubing and a siphon, and he could actually siphon right down to his main drain. So he didn't have to have the Python tube laying around his house, and he really liked that. He did get a snail caught in there though. That was a real pain in the ass. So that was something new. We kind of touched on algae, and I do want to mention we use a lot of ICP testing, and specific trace element addition is something that comes with ICP testing. I think it's a phenomenal new adventure in our world. It's answered a lot of really weird questions. There's no way we would have been able to answer without it. It's always metals. We're chasing metals. And it tells us what kind of metals we're chasing. And now we know, like, if it's this type of zinc, it's probably coming from stainless steel or something. And we can then start to help people in, you know, a 15,000+ gallon aquarium search for this, versus these are easier for us to search. It's really, really great stuff. I should also mention that I'm good friends with the owner of Triton. We visited him in Australia a few years ago, and we have the conversation, when are you going to bring me on? Da, da, da. I'm like, listen, hear me out. And the reasons are pretty simple. So I have to be able to do it again with a vast majority of people across the US or across the world, and then they don't want to have to jump into a system like this if they have an ongoing system. You kind of have to jump into a Triton type system from the beginning. You need the correct equipment and so forth. And it does work. Their examples are amazing. But the note water change systems do require specific trace element additions consistently. And as of today, yes, still today, there's no way to ensure that redundancy since there's no probes that measure those things. So if you're automating it blindly. and that scares the hell out of me anyways. So if a pump fails on, you've spiked your parameters, which can only be fixed by water changes. So we're back to water changes anyways.
Jason Fox.
Fox uses it?
Jason Fox.
Jason
That's
Fox.
all he does is water change.
Yeah.
He doesn't dose anything.
Foxy's proper old school too, man. That's why we're friends. You know? No. So this is the Triton method. There's a couple others out there as well. In my opinion, if you're going to do it, I really trust the Triton method. I think they have the purest elements out there. I think their ICP method is as close as real as you can get. One of the big players in the ICP, they're actually doing some really interesting conversions, and I don't think that those levels are right. And we've kind of proved it. I can't say a ton more. But anyways, these guys are great. So remember, I'm coming from a business mindset. I mentioned that many times now. If I'm looking at the Triton method from your eyes or a home hobbyist set of eyes, or I have the time and I'm interested in this kind of stuff, it's really, really intriguing. You know, so you have to do your own research on that. The jury's out in my book because I don't have any long-term experience utilizing it. But I do have some friends that have used it and they freaking swear by it. So, you know. This was my method of doing big water changes in that tank. This was pretty commonplace. The angels could care less. The corals could care less. They slimed up. They spit at me. They did their thing, but it was fine. Oh, that's the interruptus on right there. I forgot about that fish. So what do we target our parameters at? We just use what the source water is. So if my source water mixes up to 8 DKH and 400 calcium, that's what I'm going to target my tank at. If Bob tells me, Austin, that coral's going to grow better with a 9 DKH and 380 calcium, I'm not going to listen to him because it's growing fine in my tank. It looks pretty darn good. And now I know when I do these water changes with fresh made salt water, the parameters right here match the parameters in my water bin. And so I can do water changes like this. I could bring it down to the fish laying on the sides. The fish don't even know. I mean, they know. They're laying on their sides. But the parameters are so darn similar. And the ones that we really have to watch for would just be salinity, pH, and temperature. If you can match those three things and you're already matching your calcium, alkalinity, magnesium with your makeup water, you can do massive water changes and your system will immediately respond to it and you can go off happy and not worry about it. If you're mixing your water and you're tweaking your parameters to something different in your tank, you're going to have a hard time doing this. You do a big water change, your animals might freak out. So that's what we always do. Whatever my water mixes up to is what my tank's going to be. Make sure you're keeping up with your RODI maintenance. If you're not changing your filters and the water starts going bad, you know, everything else is kind of all for naught. I mean, everything else, the skimmer, the pumps, take care of these filters, make sure you're getting that pure water in there. By the way, a lot of people kind of choke. You want to let your carbon in your RODI flush. This is what comes out of your carbon cartridge if you don't let it flush. So if you don't flush them, that immediately goes to your membrane, boom, it starts to foul the membrane. You get a little bit longer lifespan if you flush this out. So that's just disconnect it from the carbon, let it run for about 10 minutes, and then plug it back in. Get all that crap out of there. Make sure that with maintenance, you're taking care of your pre-filters. Those bags are gnarly. Those are doing so much more damage to this system than good. So if we're going to use pre-filter bags, make sure you're changing them. What does that mean? Well, it depends on the bag, depends on the fleet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get the crap out of there because otherwise it's just dissolving into the tank itself. Test your water. Obviously, that's probably basic for all of us. We use very basic refractometers, but we have a very stringent rule. We use recalibration solution before every use of this thing. If you drop this on the ground, sometimes they skew a little bit. We replace all of our liquid titration reagents and all of our refractometer solution once a year. The stuff does go bad. A lot of times it's dated. You could pay attention to that. But the refract solution, I've seen people using them and it's like way off. Every time you open that little cap, a little bit evaporates. So just replace it, stay on top of that. But we don't do anything fancy with this stuff. There are very fancy ways of doing this. If you're into it, tear it up. As you know by now, I'm not. But nowadays, most of our reef tanks do have a trident on them. That is something that's like kind of otherworldly when you can see those 3 levels consistently tested every day. And then our techs will go through once a week and back those readings up. They still back them up because they've been super solid. We actually haven't had any issues, but someday we will, and you don't know unless you're backing it up. Maintenance, keep your protein skimmer clean. Protein skimmer is only going to work as good as the frequency you clean it. So the inside of the neck is where we're pushing all those bubbles up. There's a bunch of gunk in there. It's not going to work as efficiently. So really clean that out. This is actually only about 4 hours to skim it. This thing used to pop the top off, and this is an old AC-driven Reef Octopus pump. It was like 11 years old, never cleaned the pump once, and it just kept running. That's a good skimmer. Some people do use automatic net cleaners. They're a cool thing, but they do move away from the KISS method. I've ran several of them, just testing them out, and I haven't had something to, like, cleaning a skimmer for me is dump it, clean it, you're done. right? Do I need to automate that? I need another plug, I need some other fancy stuff, and to me it just didn't make a ton of sense. But again, some people like that aspect of the hobby. Tear it up, but you will have to pay for it and maintain it. When you're using chemical media reactors, we need to make sure we're taking care of those too. Pay attention. Typically the vendor or manufacturer will have a recommendation based on how often you should clean it, or change it, I should say. And then I have been across a couple of them, like, oh, I just didn't need the carbon anymore, so I left it in there for 6 months running. I'm like, this is like a detritus trap, and we're just doing ourselves and our tank a disservice at that point. So make sure and take care of it. If you do run UVs, you got to take care of it just like everything else. And your quartz sleeves are prone to get some mineral deposits over them over time. Very easy to clean. But this client swore up and down that he was doing all of his maintenance, and was like, I pulled that out. I was like, you might as well just turn this thing off. It's not doing anything, you know. So again, if we add a UV, we need to maintain the UV. Austin, do we need it? You have to answer that for yourself.
How often do you recommend checking the quartz sleeve?
Probably quarterly. Yeah, quarterly is probably a good bet. And then once you're used to it, you know, you could go longer than that. I mean, mine personally, I don't check. I check it when I change the bulb, which is every 9 months. I'm not dosing anything in the tank. You know, like I know it's, but if you're dosing, especially 2-part or something, Kelquasts are right next to the inlet, probably need, just check it every 3-4 months to be good. If you're relying on your probes, pH, whatever, to control your equipment, you should be recalibrating them every 30 days. You should be replacing them every 6 months. Remember, this is what I have to say. If you're using lab grade probes, you can usually get every 60 days, replace them every 12 months. I think, honestly, now most probes coming out are lab grade, so they get a little bit longer out of there. If you're using probes to monitor levels only, you could probably be a little bit lazier with that. But keep in mind, these probes are only as good as the frequency they're calibrated, and they will skew. So we do want to keep an eye on them. And if you know that, like, you know, it's always off by 0.5, that's fine, power to you. But you could always just recalibrate it too, and then make sure it's online. And if you're controlling something, you got to recalibrate them. All your equipment, your pumps, this and that. We had that one slide with the, how do I say it? The propeller pump on the right with the rust on it earlier in the presentation. You know, that was only found because the pump was operating fine. It was only found because it was just going through during basic maintenance and saying, oh man, there's rust getting into my tank. So just having your hands on this stuff, understanding how to take them apart before there's an emergency. I've been around a couple clients that they take their pump apart and it just falls and they're like, what do I do? Well, let's do our maintenance, keep them clean, and then you'll be fine. I'll remove the detritus from the sump several times a year. If your sump collects detritus, it's kind of just building up down there. You can use a Python, you can use a gravel vac. It just prevents that LARS, lazy ass reefer syndrome. Helps us stay on top of that stuff. Change any of your bulbs in regular intervals. So if you're still running T5s, that's usually every 9 to 12 months. For UV bulbs, we do 9 months, pretty much any brand. Manufacturers claim 14 months. Don't trust that. If running LEDs, keep track of your running time. You know, even if the bulb or diode is still lit, the spectrum does shift, and over time it really won't be giving the usable light to the corals. It'll be giving great light to algae. So just keep that in mind, that even if it's still lit, it could be going bad. There's LARS. That was a term coined by Joe Yaulo, lazy ass reefer syndrome. So that was a heater. The tank was shocking someone, and I didn't even know there was a heater in it, but I was getting shocked too. And then I finally found the cord coming out of the back behind the protein skimmer, and I was like, this isn't your skimmer cord. Oh, I forgot that heater was in there. That's all calcium carbonate. I mean, that thing was still on. So it's not sensing the water at this point. You know, it's sensing whatever the hell that is, stuck in a deep sand bed. Don't ever put a heater near substrate. Don't do it. There's a couple heaters out there that are made for like beta tanks, made to be buried under that. Okay, fine. But these types of heaters need free-flowing water around them to be able to sense that temperature control, and then you don't want them to overheat. And if the water's stagnant around them, a low flow area of the sump, you could get weird stuff. This was a lot more than that. So try to avoid that. Oh, and a lot of times, any of the dangerous situations I've seen, it's always been a product of LARS. Always. All right. So these things mean something. If you find brands that don't have these, they're just being cheap, you should probably avoid them. These certifications exist for a reason, to ensure their products are safe. I've seen the end result of aquarium fires and floods. It's pretty bad. So this one was a photo I pulled online. I actually can't share the ones that I've seen. But salt water and electricity do not mix. For the sake of your family, your home, and for the animals, don't play with this stuff. It's just a fish tank, right? Like, I know some of us get obsessed with it. I am, clearly. But that could happen overnight, and you're displaced for a year or more. You lose a family pet, you lose everything we did, and, you know, potentially we lose ourselves. It's just not worth it. So safety's easy, and it's cheap. It's basically free, right? So this was a breeding system that a friend of mine set up. When I first saw the picture, I was like, that's the ugliest damn thing I've ever seen. You know, just like a lot of it's kind of goofy. But gosh, is it safe? This is a power strip super far away from the lights. These lights kind of sketch me out being over the bins, but it's lower than the water line. Drip loops galore, power's way up out of the way, controller's way up here, even if it splashes. You know, if we have a lot of plugs and power strips and stuff down here, that's where I start to cringe a little bit. So really just keep it up and away. If you have a separate compartment in your stand, great. Anything we can do to protect water from getting into the outlet is imperative. Anything we can do to ensure there's a drip loop in there is imperative. Does anyone here not know what a drip loop is? My wife's fine. You don't know? So if we have if this is, oh, here, we got a tank here, and then you're going down into a plug in the wall. We want the cord to come, if this is your plug, the cord has to come down and create a loop. So if water follows that cord down, it'll drip at the bottom of that loop. It won't go straight in the plug. If I can almost reach it and I can plug it in. We have a direct route for water to go into our outlet. And I don't care if you have GFI or power surge protectors or any of that stuff, back and short. And we see it all the time, unfortunately. So it's as simple as a loop. When I create a loop, I zip tie it a lot of times and create that like extra robust loop, you know. I'm a freak about it, but when you see enough of that, it's free. So again, it can be very, very unsightly, but works well, or you can do something super fancy like this. This is my buddy Richard at Aficionado. He's like, Austin, look at this thing, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, it's super cool. It looks cool, it looks great. The thing that makes me nervous about these is you do get RF, radio frequency interference in some pieces of equipment. The longer your cords are, the more wire you have. Sometimes these guys start talking to each other funny. We've seen it a couple times. So if you have weird communication issues, chase down how much cable are you running between them. There are limits on that. The other thing for this is if I ever have to get back here, I'm probably going to need a drink before it, right? Like that just kind of, woo! So it looks really cool, but make sure you're going to want to maintain it long term as well. And yes, the center lights up. Not the KISS method, but he's super into it, and I think it looks rad, don't get me wrong. But we just have to keep in mind what we really want to do. On the same along lines of safety is safety for our animals. If we're getting into this, we have to be prepared for power outages, what have you. It's going to happen, not if, but when. Matt and I were discussing some transformers blowing up in Monterey not too long ago. Our office in Carmel was without power for 8 days. And we didn't lose anything, and I couldn't believe it. I was out of town, thank gosh. I was on a big build, and so all my wonderful coworkers kept us going. This is my favorite immediate piece of backup power. If you have any Ecotech pumps, these work really well. To me, this is just a stopgap to get a generator running. This will not save your tank, but I do run these, and I think every company should have an easy plug-and-play version like this. I wish more of them would come out with them. I've heard some more are coming, but gas generator is pretty self-explanatory. That's not only going to run back up on your pump, it's going to run your whole tank. Don't worry about lighting for about 5 days in your reef tank if you have to skimp on power. It's just a cloudy day on the reef, they'll be fine. But let's get your temperature control, your pumps running, make sure the flow's going. And then also on the terms of safety is backup equipment. It never ceases to amaze me how we can, and me included, dump a ton of money into this stuff, and then a simple pump breaks, and you're like, oh, I'm screwed now. I'm literally screwed. Now I need to go to Petco and figure out how to hobble an Aqueon bubbler for blah, 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 whatever. So when you buy one pump, buy two. Or just have it in your budget to buy two very quickly. Maybe for this, you don't want to have the whole thing, but have the wet side, have the power adapter. Personally, I have a brand new set because if it's the wet side or the dry side or the power adapter or the controller, I have it on hand. Same with supply pumps. I'm always keeping an extra one of those. Beyond that, I don't keep a ton of backup stuff. But that's what keeps your animals alive. You know, your temperature control is going to be important too, but your supply pump and your in-tank power heads are what keeps your animals alive. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. We're getting towards the end here. So this is just a couple quick photos of systems that I've used.
Tank police.
Yeah, this is an 8-gallon. No, I'm just kidding. This is a 300-gallon tank. The other is just over there, and then they did get upgraded at some point. But this is probably the most low-tech tank I've ever done, and we grew these fish out of the water. We were pulling corals out of here. No coral collector is going to be impressed in here, but the look on the kids' faces, the doctors, everyone that passed this tank, their minds were just blown. And, you know, again, pushing the message of conservation, this was an easy one to do it in. This tank had a skimmer, it had a backup heater, it had a supply pump. We finally got them to buy a power head. I think I donated one as well. Had really old crappy lights, and that was it. Big water changes. We just kept this tank going along with big water changes. We never dose. Just kept it going. And he did have stony corals on the other side too. This one was ran for over a decade, and then the client moved just before we moved out here. So we did take the tank down. The fish and corals moved on. You're probably sick of seeing this one, but again, it was the very simple LSS design. The clients were always asking where the rest of the equipment was done. That was my last personal tank, so that's why I'm showing it a lot. I miss it. But this method works with all kinds of animals too. So this was a tank in our old office, moon jellyfish, Aurita. These guys were pretty small, but they didn't need a ton of anything different. They just wanted, low parameters and clean water. Low nutrients and clean water. And so we utilized the same methods to do this. That was the tank you just saw. It shared the stand with a mangrove tank, and it shared a life support system, very basic lights. We were able to grow and keep these crazy animals going very, very well with just insanely simple equipment. This was a little close-up of the mangrove tree. A bit of a side note, Pinterest feeds me this photo like once a week. Someone jacked it off my old website, and now they're like, oh, you'd love this mangrove tank. I'm like, yeah, that's mine. So if you see that on Pinterest, that's from Livonia, Michigan. The mangrove shared its tank with a Cassiopeia species, which is an upside-down jellyfish. So both of those display tanks you saw on that stand had jellyfish in it. It was a really fun display. Lindsay used to do yoga in front of it. I really miss these tanks, but anyways, you can't move them all to California, So this was the basic LSS for that. Drains came down, filter socks, no skimmers. You don't skim jellyfish tanks, FYI. Couple baffles to set water height. We did have an auto top off on there. Supply pump came up, fed a media reactor. Carbon at this point, we fed a bioreactor because there wasn't much bio up there, if you notice. It actually runs along the top, hits a UV, out of the UV, and back up to the tank. So this tank was actually really, really easy to maintain. Everything I needed, nothing I didn't, and still a little bit of automation, so we weren't tinkering with it every darn day. This is a shot of the Tenji office down in Carmel. If you guys are ever in the area, please come visit. Let me know. I'll probably be out of town, but my coworkers will be welcome to show you in. If I am in town, we're going to have a great time. 2 weeks out of the month, you'll find me there. So every system in this shot or in the office, including the backhouse quarantine systems, relies on the same exact principles we've talked about today. We have one big freshwater display. We have a nice big saltwater reef tank. We have a fully aquacultured saltwater reef tank here. And these are two little nano tanks. I think they're gone now. COVID might have taken them with them. But anyways, the same principles apply even at this office. This was a fun little video I found of our reef tank when it was brand new growing in. I couldn't find any really great updated photos, but that was our little conspic angel. Unfortunately, he's not with us. Genicanthus angel got a little aggressive around February and took him out over a weekend. So a $12 fish killed my $2,000 fish. That fish was captive bred, the conspic angel. Matt already knows. We already told him, and we still have another one. Sorry?
Do you still have the culprit?
The culprit? Yeah, he runs that tank. Yeah, he keeps a purple tank twice his size in line. We're just like, whatever, dude. But yeah, same concept. That tank, even in its infancy, was still new there. So this is actually a little sneak peek of something. Don't get too excited, but I haven't posted anything about it. This is my first personal aquarium in 5 years. It contains my first personal fish I've purchased in 7 years. But I just want to show you that it's simple. And this is a temporary system, but it's everything we talked about in a 20-gallon JBJ all-in-one tank. So I'm not really going by the super high quality of glass and everything I know of. It's very thin. It makes me so nervous. But it is a temporary tank. And I did just keep it as simple as possible. Everything I need, nothing I don't. So it has a supply pump. It has a heating system, which is actually an Aqualogic controlled industrial system. It has a basic LED bulb on top you'll see in a second. It has an MP40 with a battery backup. So I have my redundancy right there. This is fish only. There's 2 angelfish this big you'll see in a minute in there. There's no need for an MP40 or anything like that in this. It's simply for battery backup. That's how I keep these animals alive when I'm gone. That's the battery backup. This says air. This little blue air pump here, everyone could probably have. They're about $20. You plug it into the wall and it runs on D batteries. The plug senses when you lose power and it automatically turns on this air pump. And so it's going to oxygenate the water. It's just a little air stone in the bottom. It won't keep your corals going long term, but short term it will, and it will keep your fish going. So I have 2 stages of redundancy for power outage here because I love my fish. And if this doesn't work for some reason or if that doesn't work for some reason, at least I've got even that backed up. And then we have our auto top off, just a basic Tenji osmolator here. Here you can see the MP40 controller. That's the Tenji osmolator, the air pump we talked about. I have a backup wet side sitting there ready to go, so if I'm out of town, my coworkers can come and slap that in here. And this is just some like wire trough to keep it cute, I guess. I don't know. And then this is just a giant turkey baster. So pretty much once every couple days, I used to go through and baste the bottom of it, any uneaten food. Now I've actually adjusted the MP40, so the food keeps going like this, and the fish eat it all, or it gets sucked into the overflow. But very basic, serves the purpose that I need for it. And I do have a camera on it, so you know everything just brings me a peace of mind while traveling. I was not really planning on getting these, you know, at the time, but I did. So this is the tank. It contains 2 captive-bred Interruptus angels from Japan. The parent company of Hikari bred these angelfish for the first time a couple years ago. I got lucky enough to get one of the shipments earlier this year. I flew down to LA and I drove them up because I didn't want to let UPS touch my fish. So I'm separating them by egg crate here. They're still learning who's who, who's male, who's female. This was just kind of a quick glance at what's going on downstairs. I think I'm talking over this, but I decided it was easier for me to just talk you guys through it. But again, everything I need, nothing I don't. And they'll be moving to a bigger system this winter, probably about 140 gallon. There's one of my dogs driving me nuts. And he loves Spectrum fish pellets. So like, if you guys ever need to get a husky. That's it today, guys. Thanks so much for bearing with me. This is a little bit of my inspiration list. You know, we're all a community here, and without every one of these people, I wouldn't be here. I kid you not, I did not add you in here. You were already in here. You know, but we learn from each other. We make some mistakes together, and we improve in this industry together. And I think we're at kind of just an amazing time when someone who's never had an aquarium can go and set it on a desk and grow a reef in like 6 months. That's insane, right? So like, let's help those people. Let's keep the hobby SARS off our back when it comes to, you know, making sure that we're putting our best foot forward. And thanks to my wife, Lindsay, for living in a fish warehouse with me for like 2 years one time. If you need to get a hold of me, Tenji is the company. That's my email, and I am on Instagram occasionally. But yeah, we'll be here for a minute. If you guys want to chat about anything, please feel free. Holler at me. Thanks so much. And thanks to Kenny again for the drinks. Likewise. Yeah.